When baby boomers started working, about 5 of them had to work to provide for every pensioner. Today, this number has gone down to around 3 workers per pensioner in rich countries. And this will only get worse. Based on OECD projections, 30 years from now there will be less than 2 workers per single pensioner when the baby boomers all retire. This does not look good. So of course, this raises the question, can Gen Z and millennials actually afford to pay for all boomer pensions? In France, this question is not a theoretical math problem. It is already leading to a never-ending political crisis.
In the capital, thousands of people taking to the streets after French President Emmanuel Macron forced through an unpopular bill that raises the retirement age from 62 to 64 years old.
And given that France is actually a relatively young rich world country, and that on top of pensions, medical costs will of course also skyrocket as the boomers turn 75, economists like Professor Giles Goodhart from the London School of Economics have said that unless AI gives us a miracle far bigger than anything we're seeing so far, economically speaking,
the next 40 years are not going to be anything like as wonderful as the last 40.
So, what can we expect? Political crises in France, the UK and Germany make it clear that the current pension system, where Gen Z and millennials pay boomers, can only be sustainable if we drastically increase the retirement age, cut pensions, or if young people accept sky-high taxes. But there's hope. Small North European countries like Denmark, the Netherlands and Iceland have systems where every pensioner saves for their own retirement. All of these savings are then pumped into the stock markets, which have historically only gone up. Right? It makes you wonder, have these countries really found a magical pension solution, or are they blowing yet another financial bubble? To answer these questions, our team has spent weeks interviewing experts, diving into the various pension systems and population data of all rich countries around the world. And what we found was quite interesting. Denmark and the Netherlands may be right, just not in the way they think. But before we get into how we can save boomer pensions and young people's incomes at the same time, we first need to confront reality. What happens if we do nothing? Here's Chapter 1, the unsustainable reality of our pension systems. Broadly speaking, there are 2 ways countries finance their pension systems. There are funded systems where workers save for their own pension, and the so-called pay-as-you-go system where current workers pay for current retirees. In practice, most countries use a mix of both systems, but the balance varies widely. Countries like Germany, Spain and Italy rely almost entirely on pay-as-you-go pensions, where benefits are financed by today's workforce. By contrast, countries like Denmark and the Netherlands depend much more heavily on funded systems where people save for their own retirement using public or private pension funds that invest in bond and stock markets. They use these returns earned there to minimize contributions. Right now, countries like Italy, Germany and France that rely on pay-as-you-go systems are facing severe pension crises because it is very clear that their pension system was not built for a rapidly aging population. Fewer workers that pay the same contribution to support more retirees that want a stable pension income. The math simply does not work. Therefore, countries have tried 4 controversial ways to make the system sustainable. The first option is to raise the retirement age. Germany, the UK and the Netherlands are all moving towards 67. Meanwhile, Italy will go even further. They have tied the retirement age to rising life expectancy, meaning that it will rise to 70. However, as you can imagine, many people who are close to retirement are not exactly thrilled about this. Why should they pay the price for the unsustainable pension system? This applies especially to workers in physically demanding jobs. Therefore, Italy's Prime Minister Meloni is now facing strong pressure from labor unions to freeze the retirement age at 67. Luckily for Meloni, there are 3 more options. The second option is to reduce pension payments. So far, this has only happened in case of massive political crises, such as when Greek pension payments were cut during the Greek debt crisis. What some governments have done though is pretty smart. They pledged to cut pension payments in the future. Not today. After all, people are less likely to protest getting a lower income if they don't feel it yet. For example, in Germany the average pension was set to fall from 48% of the average wage to 45% by 2040. Still, here a 3-point drop seemed actually a bit too far for older workers especially, and they have revolted, causing politicians to raise this back to 46%. This then brings us to the third option, raising worker pension payments. For example, between 2018 and 2023, Canada has been gradually increasing the contribution rate from 5 to 6%. And similarly, Mexico and South Korea have announced worker contributions will have to increase. But again, this is politically super tricky. When it comes to pension reforms, there are just no good options, it seems. More retirees and fewer workers. Of course, someone will have to take a hit. This is why pay-as-you-go pension reforms almost always trigger massive public backlash.
You still have 2/3 of the French opposed to the pension reform.
Although there is of course a simpler option. For example, the most rapidly aging country in the world has so far avoided politically very hard pension choices by simply increasing government borrowing. And honestly, while people like to think about government inefficiencies and bureaucracies that are behind ever-rising government debt, the cold hard reality is that for most of the rich world, it has mostly been about increasing social security payments to pensioners and ever-increasing healthcare costs that also mostly go to pensioners. Sadly, today it seems like more and more governments are hitting the limits of what they can borrow without facing massive consequences. Both the UK and France recently flirted with a government debt crisis, and not coincidentally, these are the two countries with some of the most generous pension payments. So it seems like governments now have to make a really hard choice between three bad options. Number one, increase the pension age. This will piss off Gen X and young boomers who are close to the pension age. Option number two, cut pension benefits. Again, this will piss off boomer pensioners or again Gen Xers who are close to the pension age. So there's also option 3, increasing taxes massively, ticking off Gen Z and millennial workers. Or do they? Could it be that countries like Denmark and the Netherlands have discovered a magical fifth option, an option that seems to make the system both more fair and more sustainable? What if workers saved for their own retirement instead of relying on future generations to pay the bill? This is exactly the promise of fully funded systems. Heavily funded pension systems like those in Denmark, the Netherlands, and Iceland, by the way, are consistently ranked as being the most sustainable on the planet. And on the surface, it's easy to see why. In these systems, rather than paying for an older, potentially much larger generation, Danish and Dutch workers mostly save for their own pensions via either private or collective pension funds. These funds then invest savings in financial markets. Rather than being funded by current workers, these pension funds pay out a pension based on what the workers saved, plus the returns the pension funds made on these investments in financial markets. This clearly looks more sustainable than a pay-as-you-go system. Instead of relying on a shrinking workforce to pay current pensions, retirement is financed by what each generation saved, plus financial market returns. And while financial markets may go down from time to time, in the long run, financial markets can only go up, right? So it seems like in these countries, Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X and Boomers, they just pay for their own pensions. Gen Z is not supporting a much larger Boomer generation. But is that actually true? Because this story got me really suspicious. You see, as macroeconomist, I was trained to distinguish between what happens in the financial system and what happens in the real economy. The economy of goods and services, the total amount of output, doctors, food and care. Financial markets often act very differently than the underlying economy. Yet in the long run, financial assets like stocks in companies are merely claims on future goods and services. So if the economy suffers because of aging, then of course these companies will start to suffer as well. In theory, stock market prices should reflect company prospects. However, in the short run, meaning decades, so pretty long, this does not have to be the case. You see, what also matters for financial markets is how much money people invest in them compared to spending on other things. In fully funded systems, the government has essentially forced people to invest more in financial markets. So what happens when a large generation like the baby boomers enters the workforce. Millions of people start saving at the same time. Pension funds are suddenly flooded with cash and rush to buy financial assets. As a consequence, prices of assets go up and forever up. That is, until the demographic situation flips. If the boomers start retiring, then all of a sudden people are taking out more money from their pension funds than the smaller, new, younger generations are putting in. So if forced saving raised all asset prices at the same time, then of course mass retirement should, in theory, cause a sustained asset meltdown. This simple logic is behind the asset meltdown hypothesis, which states that once the boomer generation retires, this flow will reverse, crashing assets. Pension funds now need to sell more and more assets to pay out pensions. But this time, the new generation who is supposed to buy all of these assets is smaller. Already in 1994, based on US demographics, Sylvester Schieber and Professor John Chauvin predicted that private pension funds in the US would start emptying out around 2024. That's right, this problem will not just hit countries with fully funded systems like Denmark and the Netherlands. It will affect private pension funds all around the world, which boomers and Gen Xers have used to supplement their pay-as-you-go pensions. In the past 40 years, many boomers have already saved for their own pensions. This created massive demand for stocks and bonds, contributing to the massively impressive stock market gains that we have seen since the 1980s, despite Western economies growing far more slowly than in the years before. When they start selling off assets, optimistic pension sustainability calculations in countries like Denmark and the Netherlands could become meaningless. For example, the Dutch have saved very conservatively. So conservatively that a 2% average profit on asset markets would be enough to cover most pension payments for the foreseeable future. But what if the asset meltdown hypothesis is correct? What if so many people retiring in the coming decades means that financial markets will stop rising forever and rather start falling for a very long time? In that case, countries with fully funded systems will again face the same difficult choice that pay-as-you-go countries like the UK, Germany and France face today. But is that indeed what will happen? Are fully funded systems just a financial trick that will not solve the fundamental demographic problem of fewer workers per retiree?
The answer is yes. It won't work. It doesn't matter whether you try and fund it, because the cost of funding it will become increasingly severe.
Now I have to say, luckily economists have found that so far many pensioners actually do not perfectly spend down their pension savings. Typically they die with substantial saved up assets still in their name, which are then passed on to the next generation. So this could soften the blow. But still, the underlying demographics are hard to escape. Whether you are a pay-as-you-go or a fully funded country, the cold hard demographic reality is that if more people retire compared to those who work, less stuff is made, while demand by pensioners remains high. Therefore, economists like Goodhart and his co-author Prajan predict that what they call the great demographic reversal will lead to decades of, number one, lower asset prices, number two, higher inflation, because all these pensioners do keep spending. Number three, higher taxes. And number four, surprisingly, lower inequality. Which perhaps the only positive takeaway. After all, if there are not enough workers, especially in the low-paid care sector, then these workers can demand higher wages. Yet even these workers will face higher inflation. So overall, the reality will remain. Aging will lead to three tough political choices. Number one, retire later. Number two, lower pension payments. Or number three, increase taxes. Or will it? Because actually, when doing the research for this video, a strange thought popped into my head. Could the fully funded system be superior after all? At least for small aging countries like Denmark and the Netherlands? You see, a pay-as-you-go system is national. German Gen Z workers pay for German boomer pensioners. German demographics determine the sustainability of the German pension system right now. But Dutch and Danish pension funds, they have invested the majority of Danish and Dutch boomer pension savings abroad, especially in the US, which has quite a bit better demographic profile. So could it be that while fully funded pension systems are essentially a trick, that may cause a big asset meltdown when most boomers retire, smaller, older countries may avoid this scenario for a long time if they invest in sufficiently young economies. We will have to see. In fact, that is the conclusion for this entire video. We will have to see. You see, the world has simply never gone through this massive demographic transition before. So the asset meltdown hypothesis and Goodhart's predictions of increased inflation, higher taxes and lower inequality, these have never been scientifically tested, at least not in the West. Because interestingly, the asset meltdown hypothesis may have accidentally been tested in Chile during COVID-19. You see, to alleviate the financial stress many households felt during the pandemic, the government allowed them to access their pension savings early. Guess what happens? Number 1, the local stock market crashed. Number 2, there was a massive inflation spike. Number 3, and this is new, the government stepped in, essentially nationalizing the pension system, making it from relatively fully funded to pay-as-you-go. That's right, 2 of Goodhart's main predictions immediately came true when Chile's pension systems were drawn down. So sadly, I suspect there is a real chance Professor Goodhart will soon be proven right that
the next 40 years are not going to be anything like as wonderful as the last 40.
That is, unless we do actually see a miracle from AI, where honestly there are some pretty incredible developments. But if you want to know more about those, I have to refer you to the following 3 follow-up analyses from our advertising sponsor, The Economist. Specifically, I recommend you check out this detailed analysis about how AI is disrupting shopping. Then follow up with this analysis on how AI is transforming the pharma industry for the better. And finally, this analysis on how big the threat to entry-level jobs already is. As these analyses show, The Economist delivers insight that truly helps you to see the bigger picture. This is why I highly recommend you subscribe to The Economist, which now offers an exclusive 35% discount for Money Macro viewers. Whether you prefer their daily journalism in The Economist app, or you are like me and prefer to catch up on the global economy during the weekend, sitting down with a nice cup of coffee and the paper edition, you'll always stay on top of the latest global developments no matter where you are, so don't miss out. Click the link in the description or top comment below, or head over to economist.com/moneymacro to claim your exclusive 35% discount today.